Maya Thompson straightened her navy blue Pinnacle Airways captain's uniform one last time before stepping into the crowded terminal at Atlanta International Airport. 4 gold stripes gleamed on her shoulders, each one earned through sweat, sacrifice, and 15 years of proving herself in cockpits where few looked like her. The afternoon sun streamed through the massive windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors as business travelers rushed past with their rolling luggage and families clustered around departure screens. Maya had woken up at 4 that morning in her modest apartment in College Park, the same neighborhood where she'd grown up. Her mother's voice still echoed in her mind from their phone call the night before. "Baby, you fly safe now. I'm proud of you every single day." Sandra Thompson had worked 3 jobs to pay for Maya's flight lessons, never once complaining about the double shifts or bone-deep exhaustion. She'd believed in her daughter's dream when nobody else did. Now, at 39 years old, Maya commanded international routes and trained new pilots. She'd logged over 15,000 flight hours, saved 280 passengers during a Category 5 hurricane over the Atlantic, and been featured on the cover of Aviation Weekly. But as she approached the Premier Services check-in counter, she felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came from knowing she'd have to prove herself all over again, just like always. The check-in area buzzed with the usual airport energy. Carmen Rodriguez, a young woman with kind eyes and nervous hands, smiled from behind the marble counter. Maya returned the smile warmly and pulled out her credentials: FAA commercial pilot's license, airline identification, medical certificate, everything in perfect order just like the 1,000 times before. That's when the voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife through silk. "Excuse me, but that uniform doesn't belong on someone like you." Maya turned slowly. A woman in an expensive burgundy dress stood there, diamond tennis bracelet sparkling under the fluorescent lights, perfectly styled hair framing a face twisted with contempt. Her designer handbag probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent. Everything about her screamed wealth, privilege, and the absolute certainty that she had the right to question anyone she pleased. "Security should escort you out," the woman continued, stepping closer until Maya could smell her expensive perfume, "before you embarrass yourself further." The terminal seemed to hold its breath. Conversations died mid-sentence. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A young mother pulled her children closer, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Even the steady announcements over the PA system seemed to fade into the background. Maya stood perfectly still, her captain's bag resting against her leg, her spine straight with the posture drilled into her during military service. She'd flown through hurricanes that had torn aircraft apart. She'd landed damaged planes when engines failed over the ocean. She'd held the lives of hundreds in her hands during emergencies that would have broken lesser pilots. But standing here, being questioned by someone who probably couldn't tell a wing from a windshield, felt like the hardest flight of her life. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone accustomed to crisis management, "I'm Captain Maya Thompson. I'm checking in for my positioning flight to Los Angeles." The woman's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. She crossed her arms, her jewelry catching the light with every movement. "Captain," she laughed, a harsh barking sound that made several nearby passengers flinch. "Honey, I've been flying first class for 20 years. I know what real pilots look like." Her eyes swept over Maya from head to toe, undisguised contempt in every glance. "They don't look like you." The words hung in the air like poison. Maya felt every eye in the terminal turn toward them. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every black woman who'd ever been told she didn't belong, every qualified professional whose credentials were questioned because of their skin color, every dream that had been challenged not by lack of ability, but by the prejudice of those who couldn't imagine excellence in a different package. Carmen Rodriguez's fingers trembled as she reached for Maya's credentials. The young woman's eyes darted between Maya's calm face and the aggressive passenger, whose name she didn't yet know. In 3 years working for Pinnacle Airways, Carmen had processed thousands of pilot check-ins. She knew authentic documents when she saw them. But the woman in the burgundy dress radiated the kind of authority that could end careers. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She thought about her mother cleaning office buildings at night so her daughter could attend school during the day. She thought about pressing her face against the chain-link fence at Detroit Metro Airport as a child, watching planes climb into the sky and dreaming impossible dreams. She thought about every barrier she'd broken, every door she'd forced open, every time she'd had to be twice as good just to be considered half as worthy. In exactly 30 minutes, someone would walk through those glass doors and change everything. But for now, Maya Thompson stood alone against an accusation that struck at the heart of everything she'd worked to achieve, and the battle for her dignity had only just begun. Part 2. The accusation Victoria Blackwood. The name would soon be spoken in hushed tones across the aviation industry. Stepped even closer to the check-in counter, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor with military precision. At 42 years old, she'd never been told no in her life. Born to old Charleston money and married to investment banker Marcus Blackwood, she moved through the world with the unshakable confidence of someone who'd always had power and never questioned her right to wield it. "I assure you," Maya said carefully, sliding her credentials across the marble counter toward Carmen, "my credentials are completely authentic." Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Anyone can fake documents these days. I've read about this online. People buying pilot uniforms, pretending to be crew members to get upgrades and special treatment." She turned to Carmen with the expectant look of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "You need to verify this very carefully. I don't feel safe with someone like this having access to aircraft." The words, "someone like this," echoed through the terminal. Several passengers had stopped pretending not to listen. A businessman in a $1,000 suit pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the record button. A retired couple whispered to each other, their faces troubled. Even the gate agents from nearby counters had paused their work to watch the confrontation unfold. Carmen picked up Maya's documents with trembling hands. Her younger brother was applying to flight school. Her parents had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but hope and determination. She understood what it meant to fight for your dreams against people who thought you didn't belong. But Victoria Blackwood was a platinum-level frequent flyer. She had connections. She had the kind of influence that could destroy careers with a single complaint. "I'll need to run additional verification," Carmen said quietly, unable to meet Maya's eyes. Maya felt the familiar coil of anger tighten in her stomach, but she suppressed it with years of practice. In her position, showing anger was seen as aggression. Raising her voice would be labeled unprofessional. Defending herself too vigorously would be called having an attitude. She was trapped in a cage of expectations that demanded perfection, while constantly questioning her right to be there at all. "Of course," Maya replied, her voice perfectly controlled. "Take all the time you need." Victoria smiled with the satisfaction of a predator who just cornered its prey. "Smart girl. Much better to cooperate now before this gets out of hand." Maya had fought for every stripe on her shoulders. Born in Detroit to Sandra Thompson, a woman who cleaned office buildings at night so her daughter could attend school during the day, Maya learned early that success wasn't inherited. It was earned through relentless dedication and refusing to accept the limitations others tried to impose. At 8 years old, Maya had pressed her face against the chain-link fence at Detroit Metro Airport, watching planes climb into the sky while other children dreamed of becoming pop stars or actors. Her mother worked 3 jobs but never complained. She just smiled when Maya talked about flying and said, "Baby, if God wanted to keep us on the ground, He wouldn't have given us dreams." Maya's path to the cockpit had been steeper than most. Community college for her aviation degree while working part-time fueling aircraft. Military service flying cargo planes over Afghanistan and Iraq. Commercial training on borrowed money and scholarship programs. Each step forward earned through merit, not privilege. Each barrier broken through skill, not connections. At 27, she'd been randomly selected for additional screening 15 times in 1 month, each time while wearing her uniform, each time questioned about her credentials by security personnel who seemed genuinely surprised that a young black woman could be a commercial pilot. The final incident had occurred when she was denied crew lounge access during a 6-hour layover, forced to sleep on uncomfortable terminal benches, while white pilots rested in leather chairs behind locked doors. That night, she'd called then Vice President Michael Harrison, who'd recently been promoted from the pilot ranks to corporate management. Her voice had been steady despite the pain when she'd said, "Sir, I won't let another pilot endure this humiliation. Not on our airline, we're better than this." Harrison had listened. More importantly, he'd acted. New protocols were implemented, training was enhanced, and Maya became his unofficial advisor on crew relations and equality issues. Now, 12 years with Pinnacle Airways later, Captain Maya Thompson commanded international routes and trained new pilots. She'd logged over 15,000 flight hours. She'd saved 280 passengers during severe thunderstorms over the Atlantic when 3 other flights had to divert. She'd been featured on the cover of Aviation Weekly. She'd received commendations from the FAA for exceptional airmanship. But standing at this check-in counter, none of that mattered to Victoria Blackwood. Victoria had opinions about everything and the resources to make those opinions heard. She served on charity boards not out of compassion, but because it looked good in society photos. She donated to causes that enhanced her reputation. She believed in order, hierarchy, and keeping people in what she considered their proper places. The idea that someone like Maya Thompson could hold the same authority as the white male pilots she was accustomed to seeing challenged her fundamental worldview. Carmen Rodriguez's hands shook slightly as she began running verification checks she knew were unnecessary. At 26, she was supporting her elderly parents and 2 younger siblings on her Pinnacle Airways salary. She couldn't afford to lose this job. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. But she was caught between following proper procedures and placating an influential passenger who clearly expected her to find something wrong with Maya's credentials. "Ma'am," Carmen said carefully, addressing Victoria while holding Maya's credentials, "these documents appear to be in order." Victoria's expression hardened like concrete setting. "Appear to be," she leaned across the counter, her voice dropping to a stage whisper designed to carry to nearby passengers. "Honey, I've seen fake documents before. They're getting very sophisticated. You need to run this through additional verification channels. Call your supervisor. Check the federal databases. Do whatever you have to do to make sure this woman is actually authorized to be in a cockpit." Maya's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the handle of her flight bag. She thought about walking away, about refusing to subject herself to this humiliation. But walking away meant letting Victoria win. It meant accepting that people like her could use prejudice as a weapon without consequences. It meant betraying every black pilot who would come after her and face the same baseless accusations. "Miss Blackwood," Victoria said, introducing herself with the air of someone who expected recognition. "Victoria Blackwood. I'm sure your supervisor will recognize the name. My husband Marcus sits on several airline industry boards. We're what you might call industry insiders." She paused, letting the implied threat sink in. "And I can tell you with absolute certainty that this situation requires additional scrutiny." The implication was crystal clear. Carmen's job security, her ability to support her family, her entire future, all of it could be affected by how she handled this interaction. Victoria Blackwood had power, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The terminal clock showed 2:58. Maya's flight departed in 77 minutes, but this delay was about much more than making a connection. This was about whether someone like Victoria Blackwood could use privilege and prejudice to humiliate someone like Maya Thompson simply because she didn't fit expectations about what a pilot should look like. And as Carmen's fingers moved reluctantly across her keyboard, running unnecessary searches that would only confirm what she already knew. Maya stood perfectly still, her spine straight, her expression calm, her dignity intact. She'd faced worse than this. She'd survive it again. But this time, she wouldn't face it alone, because in 28 minutes, everything would change. Part 3. Gathering witnesses. The verification process stretched into its 7th minute as Carmen Rodriguez's fingers moved across the keyboard with increasing reluctance. Every database search returned the same information. Captain Maya Thompson was legitimate. Her credentials were authentic. Her status was current. Her record was impeccable. But Victoria Blackwood stood there with arms crossed and eyebrows raised, radiating an expectation that something suspicious would eventually be discovered. More passengers had gathered around the Premier Services counter. What started as casual curiosity was becoming focused attention as the delay stretched on and tensions escalated. The crowd formed a loose semicircle around the confrontation, creating an impromptu theater where Maya Thompson's professional reputation was being put on trial. James Rodriguez, a 45-year-old project manager from Phoenix, stood near the back of the crowd with his phone discreetly recording. He'd been a frequent flyer for 20 years and had seen his share of airport drama, but this felt different. This felt wrong. When he heard Victoria question Maya's credentials based purely on appearance, something clicked in his mind. He'd experienced workplace discrimination himself and recognized the patterns immediately. "This is unbelievable," he whispered to his wife, keeping his phone steady. "They're questioning a pilot's credentials because of her race." Lisa Parker, a 52-year-old retired teacher from Baltimore, had been waiting in the adjacent first-class line when the confrontation began. She'd spent 30 years in public education dealing with parents who questioned whether minority teachers were qualified to educate their children. She recognized institutional bias when she saw it, and she wasn't about to stay silent. "Excuse me," Lisa said, stepping forward with the authoritative voice of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "I've been flying for 3 decades, and I've never seen a crew member's credentials questioned this extensively without cause. This is clearly discriminatory." Victoria whirled to face this new challenger, her burgundy dress swishing with the sudden movement. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. This is about flight safety and proper verification procedures." "Flight safety," Lisa's voice carried clearly across the terminal area, commanding attention without shouting. "I think what this is really about is someone who doesn't believe that black women can be airline captains." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd like wind through grass. Some passengers nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable with the direct confrontation, shifting their weight from foot to foot. But the issue was now openly acknowledged rather than hidden behind euphemisms about verification procedures and additional scrutiny. Robert Martinez, a 29-year-old off-duty flight attendant heading home to Denver, pushed through the crowd when he heard the name Maya Thompson being questioned. He'd worked several flights with Captain Thompson over the past 2 years. He knew her reputation among crew members. He knew her skill level. He knew the respect she commanded from other pilots. "Wait a minute," Robert said loudly, his voice cutting through the murmurs and whispers. "Did someone just question Captain Thompson's credentials? Maya Thompson?" He laughed with genuine disbelief. "Lady, you're questioning one of the best pilots in the entire Pinnacle fleet. She saved 280 passengers last year when everyone else would have diverted. She's probably logged more international hours than any other captain on the seniority list." Victoria's face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or anger was unclear. Her carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack under the weight of public scrutiny. "I don't care what you people claim. I can see what's obvious to anyone with eyes. This is diversity hiring gone too far, and it's compromising passenger safety." The mask was slipping. The polite concerns about verification procedures were giving way to raw prejudice expressed openly and without shame. Several passengers gasped audibly. Others shook their heads or pulled out their own phones to document what they were witnessing. Jennifer Walsh, Victoria's travel companion and longtime friend, finally spoke up in support. At 38, she shared Victoria's social circle and many of her attitudes. Victoria is absolutely right to be concerned. We've all read about these fake credential situations. The airline has a responsibility to verify everyone thoroughly, especially when something seems unusual. Unusual how? Challenged Lisa Parker, her teacher's instincts fully engaged now. What exactly seems unusual about a uniformed pilot presenting proper credentials? Jennifer's eyes darted around the crowd, looking for support that wasn't materializing. Well, it's just not what you typically expect to see. You mean it's not what you're used to seeing, corrected Robert Martinez. There's a difference. James Rodriguez's phone continued recording, capturing every word and facial expression. His viewer count was climbing as people shared the link on social media. Comments were flowing in real time, most supporting Maya and condemning the discrimination they were witnessing. Carmen Rodriguez felt the situation spiraling beyond her control. She'd now verified Maya's credentials through 4 different databases: employee records, FAA licensing, TSA clearance, medical certification. Every search returned the same information. Captain Maya Thompson, 12 years with Pinnacle Airways, current medical certificate, valid license, exemplary safety record. There was literally nothing wrong with any of the documentation. "Ma'am," Carmen said quietly to Victoria, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've run complete verification through all available channels. Captain Thompson's credentials are completely legitimate and current." Victoria's voice rose to a level that could be heard throughout the entire terminal area. "Then you're not looking hard enough. I want you to call the FAA. I want you to call corporate security. I want someone in authority to verify that this woman is actually qualified to operate commercial aircraft. Because I'm telling you right now, I will not board any plane that she's flying." Maya spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice cutting through the noise with the command presence that made her effective in emergency situations. "Ma'am, you have every right to choose not to fly with any pilot you don't trust. However, you don't have the right to make false accusations about my qualifications or my credentials." "False accusations?" Victoria's voice reached a near shriek. "I'm protecting other passengers from potential fraud. This is exactly the kind of situation the TSA warns us about: people impersonating airline crew to gain access to secure areas or to get special treatment." Brad Mitchell, the duty supervisor, had been summoned by another agent who'd noticed the commotion. At 38 with 8 years of company experience, Brad had a tendency to avoid conflict whenever possible. He particularly disliked situations that could reflect poorly on the airline's customer service ratings. But as he approached the counter and assessed the scene, the gathered crowd, the recording phones, the rising tensions, he knew this situation was far beyond a simple customer service issue. "Good afternoon," Brad said, his smile automatic and practiced. "I'm Brad Mitchell, the duty supervisor. I understand there's some concern about documentation." Victoria turned her full attention to him like a laser focusing on its target. "Yes, there certainly is. This woman is attempting to check in with what I believe are fraudulent credentials. She's claiming to be a pilot, but frankly, that's obviously impossible. I'm requesting additional verification before this goes any further." Brad looked at Maya's uniform, crisp and professional, 4 gold stripes gleaming. He looked at her credentials spread across the counter. He looked at her calm, professional demeanor. Then he looked at Victoria Blackwood's expensive clothes, her confident posture, her expectant expression. In his experience, problems usually came from difficult passengers, not from crew members. But Victoria looked like someone who could cause significant problems if not handled carefully. "Well," he said slowly, measuring his words, "we can certainly run additional verification if there are specific concerns about the documentation." Maya felt the situation slipping away from rationality, cascading down a path where prejudice was being validated by institutional procedure. "Sir, I'm Captain Thompson. I've been flying for this company for 12 years. My employee number is 47,291. You can verify my status with crew scheduling, with flight operations, or with any supervisor in the pilot department. This is a routine positioning flight that I've made hundreds of times before. Brad nodded noncommittally, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I'm sure we can sort this out quickly. Carmen, please run a full verification through all available channels. What should have taken 2 minutes was now stretching toward 15. Other passengers in the Premier Services line were becoming impatient, but nobody complained about the delay. They were too interested in watching the drama unfold, too captivated by this real-life confrontation between privilege and dignity. Victoria stepped back slightly, satisfied that she'd successfully planted doubt about Maya's legitimacy. "Thank you for taking this seriously," she said to Brad. "Airline security is everyone's responsibility. We simply cannot be too careful these days." Maya stood perfectly still, maintaining her professional composure while inside. A storm of frustration and anger built pressure like thunderheads before a hurricane. She'd been accused of fraud. Her credentials had been questioned. Her competence had been challenged. And all of it was happening in public, in front of passengers who would remember this scene every time they saw a black pilot. The clock on the terminal wall showed 3:03. Her flight departed in 72 minutes. But the seconds ticking away weren't her primary concern anymore. This was about whether someone like Victoria Blackwood could use privilege and prejudice to humiliate someone like Maya Thompson simply because she didn't fit expectations about what a pilot should look like. And as Carmen's fingers moved reluctantly across her keyboard one more time, as the crowd pressed closer to watch the outcome, as James Rodriguez's live stream reached 50,000 viewers and counting, Maya Thompson made a decision. She would not walk away. She would not back down. She would stand here as long as it took for her credentials to be verified, for the truth to be established, for justice to be served. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every qualified professional who'd ever been judged by their appearance rather than their achievements. In 25 minutes, someone would walk through those terminal doors and change everything. But for now, Maya stood alone, her dignity intact, her resolve unshaken, her future hanging in the balance. The battle was far from over. In fact, it was about to reach its breaking point. Part 4. The breaking point, the tension in the terminal had become almost physical. A pressure you could feel pressing against your skin like the air before a thunderstorm. Carmen Rodriguez's verification process had stretched to its 10th minute, and her supervisor Brad Mitchell stood beside her looking increasingly uncomfortable as the crowd continued to grow and phones continued to record. "Ma'am," Carmen said one more time to Victoria, her voice carrying a note of desperation now, "I've verified Captain Thompson's credentials through 7 different channels. Federal databases, company records, FAA verification, TSA clearance programs. Everything comes back positive. There is absolutely nothing wrong with any of her documentation." Victoria's jaw tightened, her perfect makeup unable to hide the flush of anger creeping up her neck. "I don't care what your databases say. I know what I'm looking at, and what I'm looking at is obviously fraudulent." Lisa Parker, the retired teacher who'd been defending Maya, stepped closer to the counter. "How many pieces of identification does your airline typically require from crew members? Because this seems excessive and discriminatory." Brad Mitchell cleared his throat nervously. "Normally just the license and airline ID. Captain Thompson has presented everything required and more." "Then what exactly are we waiting for?" Lisa demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades managing difficult situations in the classroom. Victoria pulled out her phone with trembling hands, her diamonds catching the light as she began dialing. "Fine. Since no one here is willing to do their job properly, I'll handle this myself. I'm calling airport security. I'm calling the FAA. I'm calling whoever I need to call to get this fraud stopped before someone gets hurt." The word fraud echoed through the terminal like a gunshot. Several passengers gasped. James Rodriguez adjusted his phone angle to capture Victoria's face as she made her accusations. His live stream had reached over 100,000 viewers now, and the comments section was exploding with outrage at what people were witnessing. Maya watched Victoria make her calls with the same calm she brought to emergency situations at 40,000 feet. But inside, she felt something cold settle in her stomach. This had moved beyond discrimination into character assassination, beyond questioning her credentials into attacking her integrity, beyond challenging her competence into threatening her freedom and career. "Ma'am," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 15 years of professional aviation experience, "you have just accused me of impersonating a federal employee and attempting to gain unauthorized access to aircraft. Those are serious federal crimes. I hope you're prepared to substantiate those accusations with evidence." The terminal area fell silent except for the distant hum of aircraft engines and the soft beeping of gate equipment. Everyone present understood that they had just witnessed something significant. Lines had been crossed, accusations had been made, and there would be consequences for everyone involved. Robert Martinez, the off-duty flight attendant, shook his head with visible frustration. "Lady, do you have any idea what you're doing? You're accusing Maya Thompson, a decorated pilot with 15 years of service, of federal crimes. Based on what? Your gut feeling, your prejudice." "I'm protecting passengers," Victoria snapped back, but her voice wavered slightly. The crowd's reaction was clearly not what she'd expected. She'd anticipated support, validation, agreement. Instead, she was facing a wall of disapproval and disgust. Jennifer Walsh, Victoria's friend, tugged at her arm with increasing nervousness. "Victoria, maybe we should just go to our gate. Our flight boards in 40 minutes. This has gotten out of hand." "Absolutely not," Victoria declared, shaking off Jennifer's hand. "I'm not walking away from this until it's properly resolved. If this airline is going to allow unqualified individuals to impersonate crew members, then every passenger needs to know about it." Maya's radio crackled with routine air traffic control chatter from nearby gates. The familiar sounds of her professional world seemed distant now, separated from this terminal confrontation by an invisible barrier of accusation and suspicion. She thought about the other pilots who were probably monitoring this situation through crew communications networks. Her reputation, built over 15 years of flawless service, was being attacked in the most public way possible. Airport security officers were approaching now, called by Victoria's complaints and also by Brad Mitchell's request for assistance in managing the growing crowd and potential public relations crisis. Two uniformed officers pushed through the gathered passengers, their faces professionally neutral as they assessed the situation. "Airport police are en route," announced one of the security officers, his hand resting casually on his radio. "Everyone needs to remain calm while we sort this situation out." Victoria smiled with satisfaction, mistaking the security presence as validation of her concerns. Finally, someone with authority is taking this seriously. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with high-stress situations. But this wasn't weather-related turbulence or mechanical problems she could handle with training and skill. This was character assassination based on prejudice, witnessed by hundreds of people in person and thousands more online. Her entire career, everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed, every dream her mother had helped her achieve, was under attack. The lead security officer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a wedding ring, looked at Maya's uniform and then at her credentials laid out on the counter. "Ma'am," he said respectfully to Maya, "I'm Officer Jenkins. Can you explain what's happening here?" Before Maya could speak, Victoria interrupted. "This woman is attempting to impersonate a pilot. Her credentials are fraudulent. She's gained access to the secure area under false pretenses, and I'm requesting that she be removed and investigated for federal crimes." Officer Jenkins turned to Victoria, his expression unreadable. Ma'am, what evidence do you have that these credentials are fraudulent? Victoria gestured toward Maya as if her appearance itself was evidence. Just look at her. This is obviously not a real pilot. I've been flying for 20 years. I know what pilots look like. This is clearly someone trying to scam the airline or gain special access. The silence that followed was deafening. Even passengers who'd been trying to stay neutral looked uncomfortable now. The racist assumption underlying Victoria's accusation was no longer hidden behind concerns about procedure or verification. It was naked and undeniable. Lisa Parker's voice cut through the silence like a teacher addressing a student who'd crossed a line. You mean she doesn't look like the white male pilots you're accustomed to seeing? That's what you actually mean, isn't it? Victoria's face flushed deeper red. Don't you dare try to make this about race. This is about qualification and safety, period. Then answer the question, Lisa pressed. If Captain Thompson were a white man presenting the exact same credentials, would you be making these accusations? Victoria opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Her friend Jennifer had gone pale, clearly realizing that they were on the wrong side of a situation that was being recorded from multiple angles and broadcast to thousands of people. Officer Jenkins picked up Maya's credentials and examined them carefully. He'd worked airport security for 12 years. He'd seen thousands of pilot licenses. He knew what authentic documentation looked like. After a moment, he turned to his partner and said quietly, "These look completely legitimate to me." His partner nodded agreement after examining the documents himself. "Everything appears to be in order." Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "Then you're not qualified to make that determination. I want federal agents called in. I want someone with real authority to examine these documents because local airport security is obviously not competent to handle this situation." Maya spoke for the first time directly to Officer Jenkins, her voice steady and clear. "Sir, I've been flying for Pinnacle Airways for 12 years. My employee number is 47,291. You can verify my status through multiple channels. I've presented my FAA commercial pilot's license, my airline identification, my medical certificate, and my crew badge. I'm checking in for a routine positioning flight to Los Angeles that I've made hundreds of times before. This passenger has accused me of federal crimes based solely on my appearance." Officer Jenkins looked from Maya's calm, professional demeanor to Victoria's flushed, angry face. He looked at the crowd of passengers, many of whom were nodding in agreement with Maya's assessment. He looked at the phones recording everything, and he made a decision. "Ma'am," he said to Victoria, "I'm going to need you to step aside while we complete our investigation. If you continue to interfere with airline operations, you could be subject to your own charges." Victoria's eyes widened with shock and outrage. "Are you threatening me? Do you know who I am? Do you know who my husband is?" "I don't care if you're married to the president," Officer Jenkins replied calmly. "Right now, you're disrupting airport operations and making serious accusations without evidence. Either step aside or I'll have you removed from the terminal." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Several passengers actually cheered. James Rodriguez's live stream comments exploded with support for Officer Jenkins and Maya. The hashtag #JusticeForCaptain Maya was beginning to trend on social media. But Victoria Blackwood wasn't finished yet. She'd spent her entire life getting her way through wealth and social connections. She'd never backed down from a fight, and she certainly wasn't going to be humiliated by airport security in front of hundreds of witnesses. "You're making a huge mistake," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "My husband sits on multiple airline industry boards. He has relationships with federal aviation officials. When he hears about how I've been treated today, about how legitimate safety concerns were dismissed by incompetent security personnel, there will be consequences for everyone involved." Officer Jenkins's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, that sounds like a threat. I'm going to ask you one more time to step aside." The terminal clock showed 3:15. Maya's flight departed in 60 minutes, but time had lost its normal meaning. This moment, this confrontation between prejudice and dignity, between accusation and truth, would be remembered long after the scheduled departure time had passed. And in exactly 13 minutes, someone would walk through those glass doors and change everything. Someone who knew Maya Thompson's real story. Someone who had the authority to end this nightmare once and for all. Someone whose arrival would shift the balance of power so dramatically that Victoria Blackwood would wish she'd never questioned the credentials of a pilot whose shoes she wasn't qualified to shine. The breaking point had been reached. The storm was about to break, and justice, real, powerful, undeniable justice, was about to walk through the door. Part 5. The cavalry arrives. Officer Jenkins and his partner were in the process of reviewing Maya's credentials one final time when a commotion near the terminal entrance caused heads to turn. A group of corporate-looking individuals strode through the automatic doors with purpose, their expensive suits and focused expressions marking them as people of authority. But it was the man at the center of the group who commanded immediate attention. Michael Harrison, CEO of Pinnacle Airways for 3 years and former pilot himself, walked through the terminal with the focused intensity of a man on a mission. At 52 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair, he moved with the confident stride of someone who'd flown fighter jets before transitioning to commercial aviation. He was flanked by corporate security officers and members of his executive team, but his attention was locked on the crowd gathered around the Premier Services counter. "Maya," he called out, his voice cutting through the terminal noise like a blade through silk. Every head turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the ambient airport noise seemed to pause as everyone within 50 yards recognized the authority in that voice. Victoria Blackwood's face drained of color as she recognized the man approaching. She'd seen him in business magazines. She'd watched him in shareholder meeting videos. She knew that voice from corporate communications. Michael Harrison, CEO of Pinnacle Airways, was walking directly toward their confrontation, and his expression was thunderous. "Captain Thompson," Michael said as he reached the counter, his voice carrying across the terminal with executive authority. "I just received multiple calls that someone was questioning your credentials." His eyes locked on Victoria like a targeting mechanism acquiring its objective. "Someone was foolish enough to call my finest pilot a fraud." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the PA announcement system seemed to pause out of respect for the moment. Hundreds of people in the terminal area had stopped their activities to watch this unprecedented scene unfold. James Rodriguez's live stream viewer count exploded past 300,000. Comments flooded in so fast they were impossible to read. Maya felt relief flood through her for the first time in over an hour. The weight she'd been carrying, the burden of defending herself alone against baseless accusations, suddenly felt lighter. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt, "there seems to be some confusion about my qualifications." "Confusion?" Michael's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "There's no confusion about your qualifications, Captain. You have more international flight hours than any pilot in our fleet. You've received commendations from the FAA for exceptional airmanship. You saved 280 passengers when 3 other flights had to divert to alternate airports during that Category 5 hurricane last year." He turned to Victoria, his eyes like chips of ice. "You question someone who's forgotten more about aviation than most people will ever know. Someone who trained me when I was transitioning from military to commercial flying. Before I was CEO, I was a pilot. Captain Thompson was my instructor, my mentor. She taught me that aviation isn't about what you look like. It's about skill, precision, and the courage to hold 300 lives in your hands at 40,000 feet." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Phones captured every word. The live stream audience exploded with celebratory comments. Maya felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since the confrontation began, not from sadness or humiliation, but from relief and vindication. Victoria stammered, her confidence crumbling like a sandcastle in the tide. "Sir, I was just concerned about passenger safety. I've read about people faking credentials to gain." "Safety," Michael interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut steel. "You questioned the woman whose calm professionalism in crisis situations has saved more lives than you'll ever touch. The woman who's logged over 15,000 flight hours without a single safety violation. The woman who commands respect from every pilot in this airline because she earned it through excellence, not privilege." Brad Mitchell stepped forward, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mr. Harrison, sir, we were following standard verification procedures." Michael turned to him with laser focus. "Standard? Your standard is to humiliate a 12-year veteran, to waste her time with bureaucratic theater while passengers film discrimination in real time, to allow customers to make racist accusations without challenge." Robert Martinez, the off-duty flight attendant, called out from the crowd. "Mr. Harrison, Captain Thompson is one of the best pilots we have. Everyone in the crew community knows her reputation." Michael nodded to him. "Thank you, Robert. You're absolutely right." He addressed the crowd directly, his voice carrying to every corner of the terminal. "This woman has more integrity in her little finger than some people have in their entire bodies. She saved more lives than most pilots will ever touch. She's earned every stripe on her shoulders through skill, dedication, and excellence that would put most of us to shame." Victoria made one last desperate attempt to justify her actions, her voice shaking now. "I was just trying to protect other passengers from potential fraud. These documents could have been faked. I've seen articles online about—" "Miss Blackwood, isn't it?" Michael interrupted, his expression ice cold. "I know exactly who you are. Your husband Marcus has mentioned you in industry meetings. He sits on advisory boards that work with commercial aviation." Victoria's eyes lit up with hope, thinking this connection might save her. "Yes, Marcus will vouch for my concerns. He understands the importance of—" "He'll be mortified when he sees what you've done here today," Michael said flatly. "You questioned someone who's earned achievements you couldn't imagine reaching. Someone whose calm professionalism in crisis situations has saved more lives than you'll ever affect. And you did it based solely on the color of her skin." Jennifer Walsh, Victoria's friend, tried to pull her away from the confrontation. "Victoria, we really should go, please." "Your friend has the right idea," Michael said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Because this conversation is over, security will escort both of you to your gate, where you'll board your flight and never set foot on a Pinnacle Airways aircraft again." Victoria's eyes widened with shock, her hand flying to her throat. "You can't ban me from flying. I'm a platinum-level passenger. I have rights. My husband—" "Were," Michael corrected. "You were a platinum passenger. Now you're a liability. Your status is permanently revoked. You're banned from all Pinnacle Airways flights indefinitely. Corporate security has your photographs and will ensure this ban is enforced at every airport we serve." The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Applause broke out across the terminal area, rolling like thunder through the space. Cheers echoed from multiple gates. Even airport workers from other airlines were clapping. Several passengers actually stood up from their seats to applaud. James Rodriguez's live stream exploded with celebratory comments, heart emojis, and messages of support for Maya. Lisa Parker, the retired teacher who'd been defending Maya, wiped tears from her eyes. "Thank you," she called out to Michael. "Thank you for doing the right thing." Officer Jenkins stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison, we'll need some documentation for the formal ban." "You'll have everything you need within the hour," Michael replied. Then he turned to Maya with a completely different expression, warm, respectful, proud. "Captain, I apologize that you had to endure this treatment. It's completely unacceptable and it ends today." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the emotion coursing through her. "Your support means everything to me." "You've earned that support through 15 years of exceptional service," Michael said. "And now, if I'm not mistaken, You have a flight to Los Angeles and then a prestigious route to Paris. 300 passengers are counting on you." Maya smiled for the first time in over an hour, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Yes, sir, I do." Michael nodded to his corporate security team. "Escort Captain Thompson to her gate with full honors. Make sure she has everything she needs for her flights." He turned back to Brad Mitchell and Carmen Rodriguez. "You two will be meeting with HR tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. Your handling of this situation was completely inadequate and possibly violates company anti-discrimination policies." Brad's face went pale. Carmen looked terrified but also relieved that the ordeal was finally over. As Victoria and Jennifer were escorted away by security, Victoria's protests growing fainter as she was led toward her gate, the crowd began to disperse. But many passengers stopped to shake Maya's hand or express their support. A young black girl, no more than 10 years old, approached with her mother. "Excuse me," the mother said softly. "My daughter wants to meet you. She's never seen a pilot who looks like her before." Maya knelt down to the child's level, just as someone had done for her when she was young and dreaming of flight. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Jasmine," the girl whispered, clutching a toy airplane. "That's a beautiful name," Maya said warmly. "Do you want to be a pilot when you grow up?" Jasmine nodded eagerly, her eyes wide with wonder and possibility. "Then you can be," Maya said firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you that you can't. The sky belongs to everyone brave enough to reach for it." Jasmine's mother's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've shown her that she can be anything she wants to be." As Maya stood and gathered her belongings, she looked around the terminal, at the faces of people who'd witnessed her humiliation turn into vindication, at the phones that had recorded truth overcoming prejudice, at the young girl who now believed she could fly. The viral video had reached millions of viewers. News outlets were calling for interviews. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements of support. But for Maya Thompson, the most important thing was that she could finally check in for her flight and continue doing the job she loved, safely transporting passengers while representing excellence in aviation. The battle for her dignity had been won in the most public and dramatic way possible. But as she walked toward her gate with her head held high and her uniform crisp and professional, Maya knew this victory belonged not just to her, but to every qualified professional who would follow in her contrail. And 28 minutes from now, when her Boeing 777 pushed back from the gate bound for Los Angeles, Maya Thompson would do what she'd always done best: fly with skill, precision, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned the right to command the skies. Justice had been served, dignity had been defended, and the truth, powerful and undeniable, had won the day. Part 6. Consequences unfold within 4 hours of Michael Harrison's public confrontation with Victoria Blackwood. The corporate communications department at Pinnacle Airways was in full crisis management mode. But for once, the crisis was entirely in their favor. The viral video had reached over 5 million views across multiple platforms. News outlets from CNN to local stations were calling for statements. Social media was exploding with commentary, and nearly all of it supported Maya Thompson and praised Michael Harrison's decisive action. The company's stock price, which had dipped briefly when the discrimination incident first went viral, rebounded and actually exceeded pre-incident levels, as investors recognized the positive public relations impact of strong ethical leadership. Financial analysts noted that Pinnacle Airways had handled the situation perfectly and predicted increased customer loyalty from passengers who appreciated the company's values. But while Pinnacle Airways was reaping unexpected benefits from the confrontation, Victoria Blackwood's world was collapsing around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. Victoria's husband Marcus received urgent calls from business partners before the couple's flight had even taken off. His investment banking firm, already struggling with declining revenues in a competitive market, faced immediate client inquiries about his wife's racist behavior. The video was everywhere, on news sites, social media platforms, even financial news networks discussing the corporate response. 3 major clients canceled meetings scheduled for the following week. 2 others requested new account managers who weren't associated with the Blackwood family. A pension fund that had been considering a multi-million-dollar investment sent a terse email stating they were exploring other options, with firms whose values aligned more closely with their diversity commitments. By evening, Marcus would receive an ultimatum from his business partners: distance yourself publicly from the controversy or find another firm. The partnership he'd spent 20 years building was crumbling because of his wife's 15 minutes of racist rage captured on video and watched by millions. Jennifer Walsh, Victoria's friend who'd been caught on camera supporting the accusations, faced her own reckoning. Her employer, a prominent Atlanta law firm with a strong public commitment to diversity and inclusion, received dozens of calls and emails from potential clients who'd seen the video. Several current clients expressed concerns about being associated with the firm. The firm's diversity committee called an emergency meeting. Partnership track reviews were accelerated. By Friday afternoon, Jennifer would be informed that her partnership consideration had been postponed indefinitely, pending a full review of her conduct and its impact on the firm's reputation. The career path she'd worked toward for 8 years had been derailed by her decision to stand with Victoria against an obviously qualified professional. At Pinnacle Airways headquarters, Brad Mitchell and Carmen Rodriguez faced very different fates. Brad's 8-year tenure with the company couldn't protect him from the obvious failure to handle the discrimination properly. Security footage showed him deferring to Victoria's baseless accusations, failing to defend his own employee, and allowing the humiliation to continue for over 15 minutes without intervention. His termination for cause was processed within 24 hours. His pension benefits were reduced due to the misconduct determination. His reputation in the aviation industry, where word traveled fast about who could be trusted in crisis situations, was permanently tarnished. Future employers would see the viral video and wonder if he'd handle their discrimination complaints any better. Carmen Rodriguez received a formal reprimand and mandatory bias training, but she kept her job. Security footage showed she'd followed procedures correctly, expressed discomfort with the extended verification process, and repeatedly confirmed that Maya's credentials were legitimate. Her youth and inexperience were taken into account. More importantly, her fear of losing the job that supported her parents and siblings was understood as a mitigating factor. Within 3 months, Carmen would become one of Maya's strongest allies in implementing anti-discrimination protocols. Her experience during the confrontation made her passionate about preventing other employees from being caught between proper procedures and discriminatory pressure from passengers. Michael Harrison didn't hide from the media storm. Instead, he leaned into it with the same directness he'd shown at the terminal. Within 6 hours of the confrontation, he released a comprehensive video statement that was viewed over 2 million times. "Discrimination against our crew members is discrimination against our values," Harrison stated directly into the camera, his expression serious but not apologetic. "Captain Maya Thompson represents the highest standards of our profession. 15 years of flawless service, over 15,000 flight hours, 0 safety violations, and commendations from the FAA for exceptional airmanship. The treatment she received yesterday was unacceptable, and we've taken immediate action to ensure it never happens again." The statement included Maya's official service record, with her permission. The documentation made Victoria's accusations look even more absurd in retrospect. How could anyone with even basic knowledge of aviation question credentials that strong? Harrison announced the immediate implementation of the Thompson Protocol, a comprehensive training program on bias awareness and crew support named directly after Maya. Every Pinnacle Airways employee, from baggage handlers to senior executives, would participate in mandatory education about recognizing and preventing discrimination. Anonymous reporting channels would be enhanced. Diversity targets would be established for management positions. But Harrison went even further than policy changes. He announced that Maya Thompson was being promoted to Director of Crew Relations and Equality, a new executive position with authority to implement comprehensive reforms across all airline operations. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, a seat at management meetings, and direct reporting to the CEO. The aviation industry took notice immediately. Other airline CEOs faced questions from shareholders and the press about their own diversity practices and anti-discrimination policies. Several companies announced they were reviewing their procedures. Two competitors rushed to announce their own bias training programs, though they couldn't match the comprehensive scope of the Thompson Protocol. The Airline Pilots Association issued a statement supporting Maya and condemning racial bias in aviation. The Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals called her an inspiration to a new generation of pilots. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People recognized Michael Harrison's leadership as a model for corporate America. The Federal Aviation Administration announced a review of industry-wide practices regarding crew treatment and passenger behavior. Representatives from the Department of Transportation met with airline executives to discuss implementing standardized anti-discrimination protocols across all carriers. Maya's story became a watershed moment for diversity in aviation. Flight training schools across the country reported increased enrollment from minority students who'd been inspired by her example and the powerful vindication she'd received. Young black women tagged her in social media posts about pursuing pilot careers, often with photos of themselves in flight simulator programs or ground school classrooms. But the personal cost to Victoria Blackwood was devastating and permanent. The viral video followed her everywhere like a shadow she couldn't escape. When she tried to make restaurant reservations under her own name, managers suddenly discovered they were fully booked. Charity boards she'd served on for years quietly asked her to resign to avoid controversy. Even her country club, an exclusive establishment where she'd been a member for 15 years, terminated her membership after other members complained about the negative publicity. Victoria's attempts to rehabilitate her image through apology statements fell completely flat. Her first public statement claimed she'd been misunderstood and that her concerns were purely about safety. The internet responded with brutal mockery, sharing side-by-side comparisons of her statement with video footage of her actual words. The evidence was too clear. Her words were too explicit. The racist assumptions underlying her accusations were undeniable. Her second attempt, a tearful video apology posted to social media, was even worse. She claimed she wasn't racist, that she had black friends, that she'd simply made a mistake. But viewers noticed she never actually apologized to Maya by name. She focused on her own suffering, the job losses, the social exile, the damage to her marriage. The video became its own viral sensation, spawned countless memes, and made her situation even worse. Marcus Blackwood filed for divorce within 6 months, citing irreconcilable differences, but privately telling friends that Victoria's behavior had destroyed everything he'd worked to build. The settlement left Victoria with significantly reduced circumstances. She was forced to sell their Charleston mansion, the house where she'd hosted charity events and society parties, and relocate to a smaller city where her notoriety was less pronounced. But even there, the past followed her. Job applications were rejected once background checks revealed her internet infamy. Volunteer positions mysteriously became unavailable. Social invitations dried up once people realized who she was. The privileged life she'd taken for granted, the life where her opinions mattered and her complaints were taken seriously, was gone forever, replaced by the consequences of her own prejudice. Meanwhile, Maya Thompson quietly became an icon in the aviation community, though she declined most interview requests, preferring to let her flying speak for itself. When she did speak publicly, At industry conferences or diversity events, she emphasized merit-based advancement and the importance of creating systems that protected qualified professionals from discrimination. "I didn't ask to become a symbol," she told one interviewer from Aviation Weekly. "I just wanted to do my job, but if my experience can help create changes that protect other pilots from facing similar discrimination, then something good will have come from a painful situation." The Thompson Protocol became a model adopted by airlines worldwide. Within 2 years, every major carrier had implemented similar anti-discrimination training and reporting mechanisms. The protocol was credited with improving crew morale across the industry and significantly reducing passenger complaints related to bias incidents. James Rodriguez, whose live stream had captured the entire confrontation, donated all advertising revenue from the viral video, over $50,000, to scholarship funds for minority students pursuing aviation careers. He was recognized by civil rights organizations for using his platform to document injustice and support accountability. Lisa Parker, the retired teacher who defended Maya so forcefully, received recognition from the Southern Poverty Law Center for her courage in speaking up against injustice. She became a volunteer advocate for workplace discrimination victims, using her experience and authority to help others navigate similar situations. Robert Martinez, the off-duty flight attendant who'd publicly defended Maya's reputation, was promoted to crew manager partly due to his principled support during the confrontation. He implemented new training programs for flight attendants on recognizing and reporting discrimination against crew members. The security officers who'd handled the situation professionally received commendations from airport management for their calm and fair treatment of everyone involved. Their body camera footage became training material for handling discrimination complaints at airports nationwide, showing other officers how to navigate the difficult balance between passenger concerns and employee rights. 6 months after the confrontation, the changes were visible throughout the aviation industry. More women and minorities were entering pilot training programs. Airlines were actively recruiting diverse candidates. Passengers who attempted to question crew credentials based on appearance were quickly shut down by gate agents trained under protocols inspired by Maya's experience. Victoria Blackwood had intended to assert her privilege and humiliate someone she considered beneath her. Instead, she triggered a transformation that made aviation more welcoming for qualified professionals of all backgrounds. The video of her racist accusations would follow her forever, while Maya Thompson continued to fly, excel, and inspire others to reach for their own dreams of flight. The consequences of 15 minutes of prejudice captured on video had reshaped an entire industry. And Maya Thompson, the humble pilot who'd simply wanted to check in for her flight, had become a symbol of dignity, grace under pressure, and the power of institutional support when leadership chooses to do what's right. Justice had been served, dignity had been defended, and the aviation industry would never be quite the same again. Part 7. A new beginning. 6 months after the confrontation at Atlanta International Airport, Maya Thompson walked through the executive offices of Pinnacle Airways with her briefcase in hand and a purpose in her stride. Her new office, spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway, still felt surreal sometimes. Director of Crew Relations and Equality. The title carried weight and responsibility, but more importantly, it carried the opportunity to create lasting change. The Thompson Protocol had been implemented across every Pinnacle Airways location in North America, Europe, and Asia. The comprehensive anti-discrimination program included mandatory bias training for all employees, enhanced reporting mechanisms for incidents, and specific protections for crew members facing passenger discrimination. Maya's office received dozens of reports in the first month alone, indicating that discrimination had been a widespread but hidden problem throughout the industry. On this particular morning, Maya was preparing for a congressional hearing. She'd been invited to testify before the aviation subcommittee about bias in the airline industry. Her calm, professional presentation would be supported by video evidence from James Rodriguez's live stream and statistics, showing the scope of the problem across multiple carriers. But first, she had a meeting with someone special. Carmen Rodriguez knocked softly on Maya's office door, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. At 26, she'd grown significantly since that terrible day at the check-in counter. She'd completed her bias training, excelled in customer service reviews, and become one of the strongest advocates for respectful treatment of crew members. "Come in, Carmen," Maya said warmly, gesturing to the comfortable chairs arranged near the window. "Thank you for meeting with me." Carmen sat down, smoothing her Pinnacle Airways uniform. "Thank you for seeing me, Captain. Director Thompson. I wanted to apologize again for what happened. I should have defended you more strongly. I was scared of losing my job, but that's no excuse for—" Maya held up a hand gently. "Carmen, you were put in an impossible situation by a passenger who had no right to make those demands and a supervisor who failed to support either of us. You followed procedures correctly. You repeatedly confirmed my credentials. The security footage made that clear." "But I could have done more," Carmen insisted, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I could have refused to run those additional checks. I could have called Mr. Harrison directly. I could have." "You could have lost your job and your ability to support your family," Maya said softly. "I understand that kind of pressure, Carmen. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat when I was growing up. I know what it means to be trapped between doing what's right and protecting the people who depend on you." Carmen wiped her eyes. "You're being too kind to me." "I'm being realistic," Maya corrected. "And I'm also offering you an opportunity. I need an assistant director for the crew relations office. Someone who understands what it's like to be caught in these situations. Someone who's passionate about preventing other employees from experiencing what we experienced. Someone I can trust. Would you be interested?" Carmen's eyes widened. "You want me to work with you, after everything that happened?" "Because of everything that happened," Maya said firmly. "You know firsthand how discrimination can hide behind procedures and pressure employees to participate. That experience is valuable, Carmen. It means you'll recognize warning signs that others might miss." Carmen was silent for a long moment, processing the unexpected offer. Then she nodded slowly. "I would be honored. Thank you for believing in me when I'm not sure I believe in myself." "Believing in yourself is something you'll learn," Maya said with a smile. "I had to learn it too. Now, let's talk about the initiatives we're planning." They spent the next hour discussing the Thompson Protocol's expansion. Other airlines were adopting similar programs after seeing the positive publicity and improved employee satisfaction that Pinnacle Airways had achieved. The protocol was becoming an industry standard, referenced in federal aviation regulations and cited by civil rights organizations as a model for corporate anti-discrimination policies. That afternoon, Maya flew to Washington for her congressional testimony. As she sat in the hearing room facing the subcommittee members, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that 8-year-old girl pressing her face against the chain-link fence, dreaming of flying, to this moment where she could influence policy that would affect thousands of aviation professionals. "Captain Thompson," said the subcommittee chair, a senior congressman from California, "thank you for being here today. Your experience at Atlanta International Airport has sparked a national conversation about discrimination in aviation. Can you tell us what changes you believe are necessary to prevent similar incidents?" Maya took a breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be clear that my experience, while dramatic, is not unique. I've spoken with hundreds of minority pilots, flight attendants, and other aviation professionals who have faced similar discrimination. The difference in my case was that it was captured on video and my CEO stood up for me publicly. Most discrimination happens quietly, without witnesses, without support, without consequences for those who perpetrate it. She spoke for 20 minutes, outlining specific recommendations: mandatory anti-bias training for all aviation personnel, clear protocols for handling discrimination complaints, protection for crew members who report incidents, and accountability measures for those who make false accusations against qualified professionals. The video of Victoria Blackwood's accusations was played for the committee. Several members visibly winced at Victoria's words. One congressman shook his head in disgust. When the video ended, the chairman said, "Captain Thompson, your grace under pressure in that situation was remarkable." Many people would have responded with anger. "Anger wouldn't have helped me, sir," Maya replied quietly. "As a black woman in a position of authority, anger is perceived differently. What's seen as righteous indignation in others is labeled as aggression in me. I've learned to respond to discrimination with composure and documentation, not because it's natural, but because it's necessary for survival." Her testimony made headlines. Major news networks played clips of her measured responses. Aviation industry publications praised her recommendations. Within 3 months, the FAA would announce new guidelines for handling discrimination complaints at airports nationwide, directly influenced by Maya's congressional testimony. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks after her testimony, Maya received a letter from a 15-year-old black girl named Destiny Jackson in Detroit, Maya's own hometown. "Dear Captain Thompson, I saw the video of what happened to you at the airport. I cried when I watched it because I've been told I don't belong in so many different ways. But then I cried again when I saw your CEO defend you, because I realized that good people exist who will stand up for what's right. I want to be a pilot like you. I've wanted to fly since I was little, but everyone tells me it's too hard, too expensive, that girls like me don't become pilots. After seeing what you went through and how you handled it with so much dignity, I know I can do this. I'm applying to aviation summer camps and looking for scholarship programs. Thank you for showing me that I can reach for the sky, even when people try to pull me down. Respectfully, Destiny Jackson." Maya read the letter 3 times, her vision blurring with tears. This was why the confrontation had mattered. Not for her own vindication, though that had been important, but for girls like Destiny, who needed to see someone who looked like them commanding respect in a profession that had historically excluded them. She wrote back immediately, not just with encouragement but with specific resources: scholarship programs, mentorship opportunities, and an invitation to visit Pinnacle Airways headquarters for a tour and a chance to sit in a flight simulator. Destiny Jackson would become the first recipient of the Captain Maya Thompson Aviation Scholarship, a program Maya established to support minority students pursuing pilot careers. Meanwhile, Victoria Blackwood's exile continued. She'd moved to a small town in rural Georgia, working part-time at a retail store and living in a modest apartment, a far cry from her former Charleston mansion and society lifestyle. The viral video still followed her. New employees at her workplace would recognize her name, search online, and find the footage of her racist tirade. Some would be kind. Others would be cold. None would forget. Marcus Blackwood had rebuilt his life in another city, joining a different investment firm under a different name, and making it clear to anyone who asked that he'd severed all ties with his ex-wife. The divorce settlement had been finalized. The chapter was closed. He'd learned a painful lesson about the consequences of standing by while prejudice flourished unchallenged. Jennifer Walsh had left the legal profession entirely, taking a position with a small nonprofit in another state. She'd sent Maya a private apology letter months after the incident, not seeking forgiveness or redemption, but simply acknowledging that she'd been wrong to support Victoria's accusations. Maya had appreciated the gesture, though she'd noted that Jennifer's career consequences were far less severe than they might have been for someone without her resources and connections. 8 months after the confrontation, Maya was selected to captain the inaugural flight of Pinnacle Airways' new route to Lagos, Nigeria. The symbolic significance was enormous. A route to Africa commanded by an African-American woman who'd overcome discrimination to reach the pinnacle of her profession. The send-off ceremony at Atlanta International Airport was attended by hundreds of aviation professionals, civil rights leaders, and passengers who'd been inspired by her story. Michael Harrison spoke about how Maya's courage had transformed not just their airline, but the entire industry. Young people from aviation programs across the country were there, including Destiny Jackson, who stood in the front row with tears streaming down her face as she watched her hero prepare for this historic flight. When Maya walked through the terminal toward her aircraft, she passed the exact spot where Victoria Blackwood had accused her of fraud. Now, passengers recognized her and applauded spontaneously. Gate agents smiled and nodded respectfully. Young black girls approached with their parents, asking for photos with the captain they'd seen on the news. One little girl, no more than 8 years old, clutched a toy airplane and looked up at Maya with eyes full of wonder. "Are you really a pilot?" she whispered. Maya knelt to the child's level just as someone had done for her when she was young and dreaming of flight. "I am. And if you want to be a pilot too, you can be. The sky belongs to everyone brave enough to reach for it." The child's mother thanked Maya tearfully. "You've shown her that she can be anything she wants to be. That means more than you can possibly know." As Maya boarded her aircraft for the historic flight to Lagos, a Boeing 787 with 300 passengers who trusted her with their lives, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The discrimination at the check-in counter had been painful, yes. Humiliating, certainly. But it had also become a catalyst for changes that would benefit countless others. In the cockpit, preparing for takeoff from the same Atlanta terminal where her integrity had been attacked, Maya felt the weight of history and hope. Her first officer, a young Hispanic woman named Maria Gonzalez, looked over at her and smiled. "Captain, I just want you to know, I'm only here because you showed people like me that we belong in this cockpit." Maya's radio crackled with the familiar voice of air traffic control. "Pinnacle 8902, this is Atlanta Tower. Captain Thompson, it's an honor to clear you for takeoff on this historic route. Have a safe flight." Maya smiled as she pushed the throttles forward, feeling the massive aircraft respond with the power that would carry her and 300 passengers safely across the Atlantic. "Atlanta Tower, this is Captain Thompson. Thank you for the kind words. Pinnacle 8902 is ready for takeoff." As the 787 climbed through 10,000 feet, Maya looked down at the terminal where her battle had been fought and won. She thought briefly about Victoria Blackwood, a woman so consumed by prejudice that she'd missed the opportunity to witness true excellence in action. Then Maya turned her attention forward, focusing on the flight ahead and the passengers who trusted her with their lives. Below, the lights of Atlanta faded into the distance as she climbed toward 40,000 feet, leaving the smallness of prejudice far below, and heading toward a horizon where merit and skill mattered more than the color of her skin. Maya Thompson had proven that authority comes not from appearance but from competence. That dignity can withstand any attack when it's built on genuine achievement. And that one person's courage to stand up against injustice can change an entire industry. The transformation was complete. Justice had prevailed, and the sky, that infinite space of freedom and possibility, truly belonged to everyone brave enough to reach for it. Part 8. Legacy. 2 years after the confrontation that changed her life and the aviation industry, Maya Thompson stood at the podium of the annual Pinnacle Airways Employee Recognition Ceremony. The ballroom was packed with crew members, executives, and industry leaders who'd gathered to celebrate excellence in aviation. But tonight's keynote address was special. It marked the 2nd anniversary of the Thompson Protocol and the sweeping changes it had brought to commercial aviation. The applause when Maya was introduced lasted 5 full minutes. Pilots stood. Flight attendants cheered. Ground crew members clapped until their hands hurt. Even the executives in their expensive suits rose to their feet, acknowledging the woman who'd transformed their industry not through anger or revenge, but through dignity and determination. Maya waited for the applause to fade, her captain's uniform pressed and perfect, the 4 gold stripes on her shoulders gleaming under the ballroom lights. She looked out at the faces in the crowd, so many of them belonging to people who'd been inspired by her story, who'd found courage in her example, who'd chosen aviation careers because they'd seen someone who looked like them commanding respect in the cockpit. "Thank you," she said simply. "But this recognition belongs to every person who's ever been told they don't belong, who's ever had their qualifications questioned, who's ever faced discrimination and chose to respond with excellence instead of anger. This belongs to all of us who refuse to let prejudice define our futures." She spoke for 20 minutes about the changes that had occurred industry-wide. The Thompson Protocol had been adopted by every major carrier in North America, Europe, and Asia. Crew discrimination complaints had decreased by 73%. Minority enrollment in pilot training programs had increased by 45%. More importantly, the culture had shifted. Passengers who attempted to question crew credentials based on appearance were immediately shut down by gate agents trained to recognize and prevent discrimination. "But we can't become complacent," Maya warned. "The work isn't finished. There are still barriers to break, still prejudices to confront, still systems that need reform. Every time we see discrimination and stay silent, we become part of the problem. Every time we stand up against injustice, even when it's difficult, we become part of the solution." After her speech, Maya was surrounded by well-wishers. But the tribute that meant the most came from a young pilot who waited patiently until the crowd had thinned. She was Hispanic, maybe 26 years old, her brand-new first officer stripes gleaming on her shoulders. "Captain Thompson," the young woman said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "My name is Maria Santos. I just want you to know that I'm here because you showed me it was possible. When I saw how you handled that situation with such grace and professionalism, I knew that this industry had room for people like us. I was about to drop out of flight school because I couldn't see myself fitting in. But after watching your video, I stayed, and now I'm flying." Maya pulled Maria into a warm hug, remembering her own doubts and fears as a young pilot. The industry has always had room for excellence. Sometimes it just takes time for people to recognize it when it doesn't look like what they expect. "Congratulations on your achievement, First Officer Santos. You earned those stripes." Later that evening, back in her quiet apartment in College Park, Maya called her mother like she did every Sunday. Sandra Thompson was 72 now, retired from the cleaning jobs that had funded her daughter's dreams, living comfortably in a house that Maya had purchased for her. "Baby, I saw your speech online," Sandra said, her voice warm with pride. "You made me cry all over again. I'm so proud of who you've become, not just as a pilot but as a person." "I learned it from you, Mama," Maya replied, feeling the familiar tightness in her throat that came with strong emotion. "You taught me that dignity is something nobody can take away unless you give it to them. That excellence speaks louder than hatred. That dreams are worth fighting for, no matter how many people tell you to give up." They talked for an hour about family, about Maya's latest roots, about the scholarship program that was helping 60 students pursue aviation careers. When they finally said goodbye, Maya sat in the darkness of her living room, looking at the photographs on her wall. Her first solo flight, her military service, her promotion to captain, the cover of Aviation Weekly, the congressional testimony, the inaugural Lagos flight. But the photograph that meant the most was a simple snapshot taken at Detroit Metro Airport when she was 8 years old. A little girl with braided hair pressing her face against a chain-link fence, watching planes climb into the sky with wonder in her eyes and impossible dreams in her heart. That little girl had grown up. She'd faced discrimination, overcome barriers, proved herself again and again. She'd been humiliated publicly and vindicated dramatically. She'd become a symbol of change in an industry that desperately needed it. But more than any of that, she'd become exactly who she'd always dreamed of being: a pilot, a mentor, a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. a woman who'd refused to let prejudice clip her wings. Across the country, Victoria Blackwood sat in her small apartment in rural Georgia, alone with her regrets and the consequences of her choices. The viral video had finally stopped appearing in her internet searches as frequently, but the damage was permanent. She'd lost her marriage, her social standing, her comfortable lifestyle, all of it sacrificed in 15 minutes of racist rage that had been captured for eternity. Sometimes, late at night, Victoria wondered what would have happened if she'd simply minded her own business that day. If she'd let the qualified pilot check in for her flight without interference. If she'd recognized excellence instead of projecting her own prejudices onto an accomplished professional. But those thoughts came too late. The past couldn't be changed. The video couldn't be erased. The consequences couldn't be undone. Meanwhile, Maya Thompson continued to fly, to inspire, to lead. She trained new pilots who would never face the discrimination she'd endured, thanks to the protocols she'd implemented. She mentored young women and minorities who saw themselves reflected in her success. She worked tirelessly to create an aviation industry that valued merit over appearance, competence over assumptions, excellence over expectations. 3 years after the confrontation, Maya received the FAA's Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award, aviation's highest honor for sustained excellence and safety in flying. She was inducted into the Women in Aviation International Pioneer Hall of Fame. The Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals gave her their Lifetime Achievement Award. Universities invited her to speak to students about overcoming adversity and pursuing dreams despite obstacles. But the recognition that touched her most deeply came from an unexpected source. One morning, Maya received a package containing a letter and a photograph. The letter was from Destiny Jackson, the 15-year-old from Detroit who'd written to her years earlier. "Dear Captain Thompson, I wanted you to be the first to know. I've been accepted into the Air Force Academy. In 4 years, I'll be flying jets, thanks to your inspiration and the scholarship program you created." The photograph is me standing in front of a plane at aviation camp, wearing the flight jacket you sent me, finally believing that I belong in the sky. You changed my life just by refusing to let discrimination define yours. You showed me that grace under pressure is more powerful than anger, that dignity can't be stolen, and that excellence is the best response to prejudice. Thank you for dreaming big enough that girls like me could dream too. With deepest gratitude and respect, Second Lieutenant Designate Destiny Jackson. Maya held the photograph with trembling hands. A young black woman stood proudly in front of a small training aircraft, wearing the Pinnacle Airways jacket Maya had sent her, her smile brilliant with hope and determination, and absolute certainty that she belonged exactly where she was. This was the legacy that mattered, not the viral video or the corporate awards or the industry protocols, but the dreams that had been unlocked, the barriers that had been broken, the young people who now believed they could reach for the stars because they'd seen someone who looked like them already touching the sky. Maya Thompson had fought for every stripe on her shoulders. She'd faced discrimination that would have broken lesser spirits. She'd been humiliated publicly and had to defend her dignity in front of thousands of witnesses and millions of viewers. But she'd won more than vindication. She'd won transformation. She'd changed an industry, inspired a generation, and proven that one person standing up for what's right can create ripples that become waves that become tidal forces for change. As Maya prepared for another international flight that evening, Tokyo this time, with a stop in San Francisco, she thought about the journey that had brought her from that chain-link fence in Detroit to the captain's seat of a Boeing 787. It had been long, it had been difficult, it had tested her in ways she'd never anticipated, but she'd never quit. She'd never accepted the limitations others tried to impose. She'd never let prejudice steal her dreams or dignity silence her truth. And now, thousands of young people were following the trail she'd blazed, pressing their faces against fences and dreaming of flight, enrolling in aviation programs and refusing to give up, earning their wings and proving that excellence has no color, no gender, no limitations except those we accept. Maya Thompson's story had started with discrimination at a check-in counter. It had been transformed by a CEO who chose justice over convenience, by witnesses who spoke truth to power, by a video that captured both the ugliness of prejudice and the beauty of dignity under fire.